Okay, so we're going to talk about the stance position, which is that we focus on scaffolding existing relationships. Can you just try to sort of help us understand basically what that's about?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that it's very easy for any team to position itself as central to the young person's difficulty and central to the sort of helping kind of arrangements. And I think we really want to do, one of the things we want to do is that right at the beginning is to encourage, as part of ordinary practice, an AMIT worker to really look at what are the existing relationships that the young person has with the professional system, first of all. There may be somebody in the professional system who the young person has already got a relationship with. It can, and this might not be exactly what we might be expecting, but it might be somebody like a teacher in the school, even if they're not going to the school very often, that the young person gets on with and the teacher has a bit of a kind of commitment to. Or it might be a social worker or a youth worker. I mean, it isn't necessarily the person that you immediately, that's supposed to be in a relationship. You only want to find out from the young person, who is it that they've actually kind of felt they've got on with. So there's in the professional relationship, we want to map out where the strengths are. In the family system, who does the young person relate, who would the young person go and tell if they were kind of worried or frightened or upset about something. And also peer relationships. Does the young person have friendships that actually they find helpful when they're in trouble or upset? I suppose that to get that on the radar at the beginning is really key, rather than assuming that either they're there or not there. To really
well, I think what you're saying is very interesting, that quite frequently with the young people that we're talking about, we assume that there's no positive relationships, that there are no strengths and no resiliences. And in fact, you know, often there are more connections than we have initially thought. Now that might be because the young person, him or herself, has a kind of vested interest in not letting us know some of the better bits in their life, because, you know, if they like us and they want a bit of help, they might think, well, we'll run away if they think we've got this really great supportive relationship with my aunt.
Yes.
But in fact, finding out those things is really key.
Yeah, no, I think that's really.
Can you just say something more about why, you know, in the longer term, about what's the why do we want to know that? I mean,
there's two things. I think there's two things about that. Is that one is that it may be that quite a bit of our work could be done through existing relationships. We've talked in a previous section about how we want to set up a key worker, develop a particular relationship with the young person. But it may be that relationship already exists, and that we could construct a team around an existing professional relationship. For example, there may well, and often can be, relationships with a youth worker at a youth club, that it might be that could be the focus where we support that youth worker in dealing with things that they don't feel very comfortable to deal with. Maybe aspects to do with self-harm or substance misuse that they don't feel confident with, but they have the relationship with the young person that they can get into conversations about that. They don't quite know what to do with those conversations. So rather than us setting up efforts to try and engage the young person, we could work through that existing relationship. So I think that's...
And that might develop into the key word, their youth worker saying, you know, actually I've been talking with a colleague of mine, John, and John's, you know, been giving me some advice about this, it's not my area. You know, at some point it might be useful for you to meet with John. And then if John, key worker, kind of meeting alongside somebody who already has a relationship, attachment rubs off, doesn't it? It sort of rubs off that if I'm sat beside someone who really gets on well with a young person, I look better just being beside this guy, you know, to put it bluntly. But, you know, that's why we would. So there's one idea then of work. You know, we could work through that relationship, these strengths. But you mentioned there was another one.
There's another one which is that we're time limited. We're passing trade, and that we may not quite see ourselves in that way. But whatever the nature of the services, whether we're working for a few months, whatever, but essentially we're not here for the duration. And what these young people need is relationships that have more long-term viability. So we just always need to be mindful that if we create relationships with these young people, these are short-term in their terms. And maybe we see it slightly differently, but we've got to be mindful that there are risks of becoming central to a young person's situation, because at some point we are not going to be there.
And that's very key, and it's particularly key when we have this other focus. Our other stance thing is about the key worker relationship.
Yeah.
That we're saying we need to be very explicit from the very beginning about the ending.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. And this is not easy when young people themselves have not had easy histories of relationships with adults. So often they could be either really, really desperate to create a close relationship with somebody who shows interest in them. And that for workers this can be, and sometimes quite seductive or quite attractive, that you become very important to a young person and they really value you. But it has its risks, and that getting very central to the young person in that way needs to be thought of carefully. And it's one of the reasons why, again, we link it to another area of the basic stance of being in a well-connected team. Because one of the things we often talk about, these kids do things that make us very worried, but the other thing that does need attention is when these young people invite a kind of closeness that is not going to be helpful for them in the long run. And there's both of those things need attention by being reflected on with others in the team.
And I quite liked what you brought in, this parallel of, we talk about needing a well-connected team, and in ways scaffolding existing relationships is trying to build up an idea that a young person might need a well-connected team, some backup. I like the phrase backup.
Yeah.
And that a lot of what we're trying to do here is to model to a young person, I need backup in the work that I do.
Yeah.
And you probably need backup in the work that you do.
Yeah.
And let's start thinking about some of the backup that's in your world right now and that you could build on or you could get the best out of.
Okay, makes sense.